No one really warns you about this moment. No one prepares you for the day you finally stop. The day you set down everything you were carrying, all the patience, all the forgiveness, all the love you kept pouring into someone who never once stopped to ask if you were running dry, and then you just leave. No big scene, no final speech, no last attempt to explain yourself, just silence, just you walking away. And the second you do, something starts happening on the other side of that silence that most people never get to understand. Something the narcissist in your life will never openly admit. Something psychology can explain in cold clinical words, but almost never in the way it actually feels, the way it hits them, the way it shakes them from the inside, the way it begins to pull apart the structure they were standing on. If you really understood this, it could give you a kind of peace you may have been chasing for a very long time. Here is the truth. When an empath walks away, the narcissist's private hell begins. And that is what we are stepping into today. Not to enjoy anyone's pain, not to get revenge through knowledge, but because you deserve to know what your presence meant, what your absence does, and why leaving someone who treated you like emotional fuel instead of a human being is not only the right choice, it may be the strongest choice you ever make. Stay with me, because this part matters more than people think. What happened between you was never small, and what happens after you leave is not small either. It changes the whole emotional landscape, even if they act like nothing touched them. That act is part of the story too. And once you really see it, you stop begging for closure from the wrong person. You stop asking questions that can never be answered honestly. You stop turning your pain into self-doubt. And that is where your freedom begins. Let's begin with you, because that is where this always should have started. You are not weak. Let's make that clear right away. Empaths are not weak. They are not foolish. They are not damaged just because they care deeply. In many ways, they are some of the most emotionally aware people you will ever meet. You feel things in full color, you read rooms quickly, you notice what is not being said, you pick up the tension beneath a smile, the sadness behind a joke, the fear hiding inside someone's anger. That is not a flaw, that is a kind of emotional intelligence many people never fully develop. But there is something almost no one tells you about that gift. It can also make you visible to the wrong kind of person. Not because you made a mistake. Not because you invited harm, but because the narcissist, the person who has built their whole emotional life around pulling energy, attention, and regulation from others, can sense what you carry. They are drawn to warmth the way something fading reaches for air. They need what you have because they cannot make enough of it on their own. So they attach, slowly or quickly, softly or intensely, and then they feed. That is not just a dramatic line, it is real psychology. What they feed on has a name, emotional supply. And before you can understand what happens when you take that supply away, you need to understand why it matters so much to them. Most people think narcissists only want attention. They think it is all vanity, all ego, all praise. But it goes deeper than that. Think about what it means to have a stable inner self, to wake up and know who you are, to face criticism without collapsing, to sit alone with your thoughts without breaking apart. Most people have some version of that, even if it is imperfect. The narcissist often does not. Beneath the confidence, beneath the image, beneath the charm, there is usually a fragile center that feels real only when someone else keeps confirming it from the outside. That is where you came in. Every time you listened, every time you forgave, every time you tried to understand, made excuses, softened your own hurt, absorbed their moods, reflected their greatness back to them, you were doing more than being loving. You were holding up parts of their inner structure for them. You were becoming the support beam, the frame, the hidden system keeping the building from shaking apart. And you did it because you loved deeply. Because when you care all the way. Because you saw something in them, maybe something real, maybe something they showed you on purpose, maybe only the possibility of who they could be. And you believed in that possibility with your whole heart. So you kept giving. You made yourself smaller so they could feel bigger. You became quieter so they could stay comfortable. You pushed your own needs aside to carry theirs. And for a long time, you may have mistaken their hunger for love. But hunger is not always love. Sometimes hunger is just hunger. And this is the part that breaks so many people when the truth finally lands. Not only the fact that they were used, though that hurts deeply, but the fact that they stayed so long, that they went back so many times, that they painted over red flags with hope, that they kept pouring life into someone who was not able to receive it in the way love requires, not truly, not mutually. But here is the turning point. The moment you really see it, not just in your mind, but in your body, something shifts. The fog starts to lift, the grip starts to loosen, and you begin to understand that walking away is not failure. It is not cruelty. It is not giving up too soon. Walking away from an emotionally draining relationship is often the first fully honest act of self-respect. It is clarity wearing courage. It is the moment you stop performing love for someone who never really saw you, only what you provided. And when that day comes, when you finally leave for real, quietly, completely, something starts to break on their side of the silence. Here is what they will never show you. They will not call in the middle of the night and say, "I am falling apart without you." They will not sit down and admit that losing you exposed something in them they spent years avoiding. They will not post a vulnerable confession about the emptiness they feel now that you are gone. They will not knock on your door and say the words you waited so long to hear, that you were right, that they were wrong, that they finally understand the pain they caused, that they are truly sorry. If you have been waiting for that moment, hear this clearly. The fact that it never comes is not proof that they are okay. It may be proof of something much bigger. It may mean what is happening inside them feels too threatening to the identity they built for them to reveal it. Maybe not now, maybe never. Because what happens inside a narcissist after you leave is not grief in the way you know grief. It is not simple sadness. It is not the aching loneliness of missing someone they loved in a healthy way. More often, it is destabilization, a cracking of the image, a harsh removal of the outside support system that was holding their whole inner reality together. Think of it like this. Imagine someone has relied on an artificial support for so long that they forgot they were never standing fully on their own. From the outside, they look fine. They move normally. They even seem strong. But the moment that support is taken away, they cannot balance. They cannot move the same. They cannot hide the weakness anymore. That is what your presence often was. Not a true partner in their mind, but a stabilizer, a regulator, a mirror. And now that mirror is gone. Let that sink in. Because once you understand that, their behavior after the breakup starts to make much more sense. The first thing that usually happens is panic. Not always visible panic, not always the kind they can even name. But beneath the surface, under whatever act they are putting on, there is often a serious alarm going off. Their emotional system had adjusted itself around the steady stream of validation, attention, reaction, and emotional labor you provided. Then suddenly that stream stops. The supply is cut off. And what follows is chaos on the inside. Restlessness, agitation, trouble focusing, a constant low hum of dread they do not know how to explain. This is often tied to what psychology calls narcissistic injury, and it is not a small event. When a main source of narcissistic supply disappears, the reaction can look a lot like withdrawal. Sleep gets disturbed, stress rises, appetite changes, thinking gets foggy. The body reacts because the mind is losing one of the systems it depended on, and here is the key point. Because the narcissist never built strong inner tools for emotional regulation, because their pattern has always been to get steadiness from other people instead of creating it within themselves, they are not prepared for what they feel. They do not have the emotional muscles for it, so they flood. And a flooded narcissist can become very confusing, very reactive, and very revealing. This is where you often start seeing behavior that throws you off. The sudden sweetness, the emotional texts at odd hours, the apologies that sound more sincere than anything they ever said while you were together, the big promises, the soft memories, the dramatic gestures, the words that pull on the exact part of your heart they always knew how to reach. And you start wondering, maybe this time it is real. Maybe losing me finally opened their eyes. Maybe leaving is what finally got through to them. This is the trap. Stay with me here, because this may save you years. What you are seeing in that moment is often not deep love waking up. It is a damaged system trying to recover lost supply. That behavior has a name too, hoovering. And if you do not understand what it really is, you can mistake it for the breakthrough you always prayed for. Hoovering is not love. It is not transformation. It is not even really about you as a whole person. It is a supply-seeking move. It is the narcissistic system sending out signals because something it depended on has gone missing and it wants it back. The warmth may feel real because the need is real, but the need is not for your soul, your peace, your humanity, your dreams. The need is for the emotional role you played, for the stability your attention gave them, for the reflection you offered that helped them see a version of themselves they could not hold alone. They are not reaching because they suddenly learned how to love. They are reaching because they miss what your presence did for them internally. They miss the version of themselves they could access only while you were still feeding the structure. And if you return, the old pattern usually comes back fast. The warmth fades, the effort shrinks, the same imbalance returns. Because the root problem was never timing, it was never stress, it was never just poor communication. It was a deep inability to meet you as an equal, an inability to regulate without consuming you, an inability to love without taking more than they gave. Pain from losing you does not automatically change that. Pain alone rarely creates real change. Pain plus accountability, plus long-term inner work can create change. But that combination is rare in this pattern. So if the hoovering fails, or you do not respond, or you return briefly and then leave again with clearer eyes, the panic gets worse. And then you reach the stage people talk about far less. The stage beneath the rage, beneath the messages, beneath the performance. The stage where the noise dies down and something they have been running from for years begins to rise. Silence. Their own silence. Their own company. Their own reflection with no mirror left in front of them. There's a kind of silence that follows the end of a relationship like this, and you have probably felt it too. That strange quiet after the chaos ends, after the arguments, after the emotional swings, after the constant tension of never knowing which version of them would appear today. When all that noise stops, the silence can feel almost painful at first. Not because you miss the harm, but because even painful patterns can become familiar. And familiarity can feel like comfort, even when it is hurting you. But here is what matters. That silence you are sitting in now, they are sitting in it too. And for them, it is not simply uncomfortable. It can feel catastrophic because you were not only their partner, you were their noise. You were the steady stream of reaction, attention, emotion, conflict, praise, reassurance, and contact that kept their inner world from becoming too still. Every talk, every reply, every emotional response, even the negative ones, was signal. It told their nervous system they existed, that they mattered, that the story they believed about themselves was still active and still supported. You were the audience their performance needed. And now the room is empty, and in an empty room, a performer has far fewer places to hide. At first, they may act totally fine. They may go out more, post more, smile harder, move quickly toward new people, find someone new to admire them, notice them, soothe them, or fight with them. Because the supply chain must be rebuilt fast. Almost any source can seem useful in the beginning, but substitutes often do not work the way they need them to, not fully, not like you did. And that is an important point people miss all the time. The narcissist does not need just any supply. They often need supply that is tuned to them. Someone who has learned their wounds, their fears, their insecure spots, their praise language, their triggers. You knew those things. You knew how to calm them in the exact way their system wanted. A stranger can give attention. A new partner can give admiration. But what you gave after months or years of learning the shape of their insecurities was much more specific. You knew the right words, the right tone, the right timing. You had been trained, often without realizing it, to become the ideal regulator for their emotional world. That is why a quick replacement may not satisfy them the same way. Not at first, maybe not ever. And so even when they appear busy, even when they seem surrounded by people, there can still be a hollow space where your particular presence used to sit, and that hollow space starts pushing them inward. This is where things go deeper than the relationship itself, because what they meet on the inside is usually much older than you. The narcissistic wound is rarely only about the present moment. At its deepest level, it is tied to the past. Many psychological models point to early environments where the self was not allowed to develop in a healthy, secure way. Sometimes the child is praised too much for performance, image, success, or what they provide, rather than loved for who they are. Sometimes the child is emotionally ignored, unseen, or made to feel their true self is not enough, not safe, not lovable. Different roads, similar lesson. The real me is not acceptable. So the child learns to build a version of self that can win approval, avoid shame, and survive through performance. Over time, that performance becomes an identity, not a deep, steady self, but a polished outer structure designed to pull in validation and keep inner emptiness hidden. That structure needs reinforcement constantly. People like you become part of that reinforcement. You are not the cause of the wound. You were recruited into the maintenance of it. And when you leave, you do not destroy something healthy. You stop helping hold together something unstable. That is why your absence can feel so powerful to them. You did not just leave a relationship. In their inner world, you stepped away from the role that helped keep their construction standing. And once the construction starts flickering, something else begins to rise. Shame. Not guilt, shame. And the difference matters more than most people realize. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt can move a person toward repair. Guilt can lead to truth, apology, and growth. But shame, especially deep, unprocessed shame, often leads somewhere darker. It can collapse inward into self-hatred or shoot outward as blame, anger, and attack. That is why their behavior after you leave can swing so hard from one extreme to the other. One day they send messages that sound broken, almost honest, almost tender. The next day they tell friends you were the issue, that you were unstable, too sensitive, too demanding, impossible to please. One moment they seem wounded. The next they seem strangely cheerful, almost aggressively fine, as if happiness itself has become a performance meant for your eyes. That is not random. That is the movement between unbearable shame and the defenses they use to escape it. And this is where your empathy can become very dangerous to your healing if you are not careful. Because once you understand what they are going through, part of you may soften. You may feel vindicated, yes. There may be relief in finally seeing that your absence does matter, that the relationship was not imaginary, that the emotional weight was real. But there may also be compassion, real compassion. The kind that sees another human being trapped in a painful inner system and feels sorrow for them. That feeling does not make you foolish, it makes you human. It proves your heart is still intact. But compassion does not mean contact, it does not mean return. It does not mean you step back into the fire just because you now understand why the fire burns the way it does. You are allowed to understand their pain without adopting responsibility for it. You are allowed to see them clearly and still stay gone. You are allowed to care from a distance. This is one of the hardest lessons for an empath to learn, and one of the most life-changing. You can love the truth of someone's suffering and still refuse the role that suffering assigned to you, because their private hell did not begin with you, and it will not end with you. You did not create the emptiness. You did not install the wound. You did not build the defenses. You were simply one of the people who helped delay the moment when they would have to face what was already there. And when you stopped, when you finally put down that weight and walked away, you did not cause their collapse. You stopped protecting them from it. That is a very different thing. And in doing that, you also did something else, something brave, something easy to overlook because everyone keeps focusing on them. You started healing. So now the focus has to shift back to you, not their panic, not their shame, not their unraveling. You understand that part now. And understanding it matters because it closes a loop. It helps you stop replaying the whole relationship, looking for the exact second you ruined it. It helps you stop treating their dysfunction like evidence that you failed. You did not fail that relationship. You survived it. And now you are standing in a strange space that is quiet, tender, and often terrifying. Because after leaving, the work changes. It is no longer the work of understanding them. It becomes the work of finding yourself again, of returning to the version of you that existed before you learned to become smaller, softer, more careful, more invisible, just to keep the peace in a dynamic that was never peaceful to begin with. This is what people do not say enough. Everyone talks about how hard it is to leave. The bond, the cycle, the addiction to unpredictability, the way your body confuses survival with love, all of that is real. But what gets talked about far less is what happens after. What happens when the exit is over and you are left alone with your own life, your own nervous system, your own reflection, and you realize with both grief and wonder that you do not fully recognize yourself. Relationships like this leave marks, not always permanent, not impossible to heal, but real. They leave habits in the body. They leave a nervous system trained to scan for danger, to brace for mood shifts, to question kindness, to fear silence. They leave a voice in your head that sounds familiar because it has been repeated so often, a voice telling you that your needs are too much, your emotions are too intense, your love is somehow both excessive and still not enough. That voice is not your truth. It was placed there through repetition. And one of the deepest parts of healing is learning to separate your own inner voice from the one built by the relationship. Real healing is not just posting a quote and moving on. It is slower, less tidy, more honest. It usually starts with grief, real grief. Grief not only for the person you thought they were, but for the time you gave, the effort you spent, the future you imagined, the self you became while trying to hold everything together. Grief for the years you kept hoping. Grief for how much love you poured into something that could not hold it properly. That grief is not weakness. It is the right emotional response to real loss. If you rush past it, it will wait. It will come back in later relationships, in sudden fear, in tension when someone changes tone, in the way your body goes on alert when someone pulls away. So let yourself grieve, without shame, without a stopwatch. And after grief comes curiosity, not blame, curiosity. Why did this feel familiar? Why did this pattern hold so tightly? Why did your heart keep trying to earn what should have been given freely? These are not cruel questions. They are healing questions. And very often, if you look gently but honestly, you find that the relationship touched something older. Many people who end up trapped in narcissistic dynamics were taught early, in ways big or small, that love had conditions, that closeness had to be earned, that safety came from managing other people well, that your role was to notice everyone else's needs while putting your own away. If some part of that feels familiar, then this relationship was not random. It was a repetition, a replay of something older, a deep part of the mind trying to return to a familiar wound and finally get a different ending. That is not your fault. These patterns form below conscious awareness. You did not choose them with full information. You came in with a heart shaped by experience and by tenderness, and someone saw how to use that. But here is the good news. Once you can see the pattern, once you can name it and trace it back, it starts to lose its automatic power. You stop walking into the same emotional room without knowing it. You begin choosing differently. You begin hearing red flags instead of explaining them away. You begin trusting the discomfort that once tried to protect you. And most importantly, you begin giving yourself the kind of love you kept trying to teach someone else to give. That is the real turning point, not when they finally understand, not when they return, not when they break down, but when you stop needing any of that to keep moving. When you can say, quietly but fully, I see what happened, I see what I gave, I see what it cost, and I am not going back. If this speaks to something deep in you, hold on to that. Because the end of that relationship was not the end of your story, it was the end of your role in theirs. Your story starts changing the moment you choose peace over performance, truth over confusion, and yourself over the endless task of rescuing someone who only knew how to use what you gave. That is not selfish, that is healing. And once that healing begins, their silence stops being a mystery. It becomes background noise. Your own voice becomes clearer. Your own life comes back into focus. And little by little, day by day, you stop wondering what your absence did to them, because you become far more interested in what your return to yourself is doing for you.